Welcome to a demonstration of a portion of GE Intelligent Platform's food safety solution. This segment highlights our tools that can help you do the right thing by arming personnel on your staff with relevant, actionable information at the right time. Can help you give time back to your operators, managers, and engineers by automating data collection and manual processes so you have more time and mobility on the plant floor. And can give you peace of mind by ensuring HACCP processes are followed and validated. Imagine that you're a line supervisor armed with an iPad or other mobile device and making your rounds in the plant rather than tethered to a PC at your desk. A typical display might look something like this. Prophecy organizes this information into a hierarchy with the plant and the various areas associated with that plant grouped underneath that, and information about what's going on in those various areas rolled up to give you the highest alarm in that particular area. Of particular interest to us might be this critical alarm displayed right now on line 1. So we're going to drill down into line 1 and see what kind of information we can glean from being able to see further down into these displays. Inside of line 1, of course, we have multiple areas for raw materials and material prep and making product and packaging and so on. And each of those areas has the highest alarm that is in that area displayed for their particular segment. In this make area, of course, is where we've got the critical alarm. So we're going to continue to drill down into the make area to see what that alarm means. That alarm, the critical alarm that is, actually is in the ovens area, and so we're going to continue with this drill down into ovens. And in our particular model for demo purposes, we only have a single oven. So let's take a look at oven 1 and see what that critical alarm is all about. As we drill down into it, we'll see that oven 1 actually has a zone temperature problem, an alarm in zone temperatures. Other things that we'll be looking at later on in this demo as well, but let's take a look at that zone temperature. At 150 degrees in an oven, that's not going to cook bread for us very well. If we go back to that and look at the zone temperature, we can try to figure out whether or not there was any sort of comment entered by an operator maybe about what that zone temperature problem was all about, where that alarm came from. As we click on the note selection, we can see that an operator at some point entered a note that said this zone temperature alarm can be disregarded because we've got a temperature probe that's bad. Maintenance has been notified about it, and right now we're following a particular SOP that allows us to make sure that we have good cook times for the particular product. There's the indication of who did this particular note and what time they entered the note, and then everything's probably okay. We can trust our operators to continue working properly and moving on from there. We should probably note at this point as well that as we go back into this hierarchy, see these indications about what's going on. This is not the only place we can see this information. We could be back at a browser as well and get information that is displayed in very much the same manner. Very similar displays that give us a consistent look and feel across the various platforms where you might want to see this information, including all the way down to the level of the notes that the operator has entered. So we can get all the same information whether we're at our desk, whether we're out on the plant floor, whatever we're doing, because this information is critical to be able to continue operating. So let's go back and actually look at these indications and what else these other indications might mean to us. So as I look at my iPad, I can see these other indications that are out here for various types of testing that have to be performed, core temperature testing and moisture content testing, for instance. If I want to drill down into details, I can take this core temperature testing item and slide it to the right like this. And now I can see from this display that since I have a new batch that's exited from the oven, I'm required to take these two different types of tests. The core temperature testing, of course, has not been completed yet as indicated here, and since we haven't completed it, we don't know what the sample value is yet, and also we know that this sampling happens at the line rather than a lab. What that tells me is that the operator has to actually perform the test. So let's pretend now that I'm the operator with an HMI in front of me and the ability to input values from the testing that I do. Let's say I insert the thermometer into the bread loaf and take the temperature and see what that value is as I read it out. Let's say the value is 201 degrees. I want to enter that value here and then from my HMI indicate that I have taken this by selecting the submit temperature reading item right here. Meanwhile, back over at my supervisor's iPad as they're making the rounds, they get the indication that the core temperature testing has been completed, and they can look over to the right for the details about the testing. The test passed. This is what the value was from the thermometer that we placed inside of the loaf of bread, and so on. And we want to see what's going on with the rest of these indications as well, specifically around moisture content testing. So probably the first thing we should do to make some room on the screen here is to remove the core temperature testing details. We're going to slide moisture content testing over and get those details up on the screen. And as before, we'll see that this test has not been completed and we don't have any values for that test because of that. But this test happens not on the line, but actually over at the quality lab, which suggests that there's going to be some interaction between the operator and the quality control technicians. Over at the line, the operator would probably pull this loaf of bread off to send to the lab and indicate by virtue of their HMI and the selections on the HMI that they've pulled that loaf and it's on its way over to the quality control lab to know that they've got a job to do over there. Meanwhile, if you imagine that now I'm the quality control technician, I'll run this moisture content test, which will take a little bit, and then actually indicate the outcome of that test on the screen as well. This particular loaf of bread passed, is nice and moist and ready to go. That whole batch appears to be good. And I want to submit that I've actually run that test and make sure that everybody knows what the current status of this testing is. So, back over at the iPad again, the supervisor once again sees that the moisture content testing has been done and sees what the results of that testing is. It passed, it's a lab test, everybody looks good right now. There are other indications to look at as well that have to do with some of the other things further up in this hierarchy, and we'll take a look at those right now. With that, we're going to be moving back up through this model all the way to the line level and drilling back down to areas of interest from there. We have displays that allow us to show alarms only and get directly to those items if you want to use that, but we're using this model as a way to show that we have context to the information that we're displaying. So back in this display, we have the packaging area with a notification that tells us there's something of interest in that area. And under the packaging area, we actually have a KPI called inspection. And upon drill down in further detail, we realize that there's a metal detector challenge test that we need to run for that particular line. I'm going to shift gears in a second here and show this same display inside of the browser window. And we've talked about this earlier, that we can show the same items inside of a browser window or on a mobile device. And now in this browser window, of course, we've got information from all the way at the top of the line, all the way down to the packaging and the metal detector challenge test detail that we were looking at before. And we're logged in as the supervisor for this particular display. If I were to log in as somebody else, we'd actually see different information, and that's fairly important. So I'm going to tab over to a different browser instance now and open up the same type of the displays, but with myself logged in as operator rather than supervisor. So here I am logged in as line 1 operator versus the other browser instance where I'm logged in as supervisor. Back over here logged in as operator, there's some things that are different. Primarily, on the left, there's an abbreviated version of that model, just from the line that I'm responsible for on down. I don't really need to know what else is going on in the plant in this particular instance because I'm a line 1 operator, not a supervisor for multiple lines. There's all the information that I was seeing before, the same thing the supervisor is seeing for this particular level of detail. But there's also some other things of interest. There's a task item up over here on the right with a number 1 saying that I've got a task waiting my attention. The supervisor does not have that same task waiting for them to do anything, but the operator does. So what I'm going to do now is select that task item and bring up the workflow task window that will walk me through the metal detector challenge test. So as the workflow task window opens up, there's a couple things to note. There's the metal detector check task up here at the top and the time that that task was assigned to me as the operator. And on the left is actually a set of steps that I'll need to go through whenever I'm performing this procedure, running wands through the line, recording inputs and those kind of things as I go along. There are detailed work instructions about what to do and an input area for me to actually input values and submit test results and so on. As I get to this section where I'm actually supposed to answer whether or not my metal detector challenge test passed or failed, I'll say no, the metal detector operated normally, and so this thing actually passed the metal detector challenge test, and submit that item to record that this particular challenge test worked properly. In the next example, we'll show you what happens when that metal detector challenge test fails and how that workflow and those tasks can actually be assigned to different people at different stages. So let's imagine that time has elapsed and the next metal detector challenge test is due to be run, and we assign that same task again to the same line operator, and here's that same workflow task available for them to run again. We'll step through these same steps at the top of this procedure to run the calibration wands through, but when we get to the section where we're going to pass or fail this, we're actually going to fail the test. So when we get to this section, we're going to say, yes, one or more of these calibration wands did not get rejected properly, and therefore we failed the test. When we do that, we set into motion a different set of operations, different set of steps, partially that we have to put product on hold, we have to notify a supervisor, and so forth. But we aren't relying on this as a manual process yet. We're recording this information as we go, and in fact handing off these notifications to the appropriate people in their appropriate roles as we get through it. So we're going to step through the rest of these steps inside of this procedure from the operator's point of view and close out this particular workflow. One of the last steps that's actually in here is to enter a comment that we can capture with this workflow task being performed and say that, for instance, we managed to not actually put the calibration wand on the belt properly, and that's why it didn't get rejected, because it wasn't on the line like it should have been, and then capture that information and move on with our job as operator without having to go any further than that. What's interesting now is we've had a test go by that failed, and when the test fails, we have to notify a supervisor. If we look at this display now and actually tab over to the supervisor's version of this and look at that tasks display in the top right, now there's a task that's been handed to that supervisor, handed off, if you will. As we let the workflow task window load up here, we'll see that it's the finish of the task that we already started out with, the first metal detector challenge test, and there's notification to the supervisor that particular test failed, and whatever steps we wanted to configure and set up for what the supervisor was supposed to do from that point on. And now that supervisor's task has been completed. We've been talking about collecting information as we do these things, and we actually have a dashboard capability inside of this display as well, where we can take components of this model and associate web displays with components of that model for you to drag and drop onto this dashboard, just about any type of web content you can imagine. Rather than having to drag and drop those and build dashboards every time, we also have the ability to save personal and shared favorites, and we've saved a supervisor's dashboard here for you to look at. And this dashboard in particular has metal detector challenge test exception reports. So this particular supervisor could use this as reports every day they have to go into production meetings, or at any given time if they want to pull them up, all they have to do is refresh that and see where metal detector challenge tests did not go successfully.